There is a bend on almost every river and creek in America that the local fishermen know by name, even if it has no official name. They know it because it produces fish consistently, when the water above and below it produces almost nothing. Ask any of them why, and most will say something about the current or the depth. And they will be right, but only partly. What makes a river bend one of the most reliable fish-holding structures in freshwater is not one thing. It is a system of interconnected factors that work together to concentrate food, provide cover, and create the exact conditions different species need at different times of day and different stages of the season. Old bank fishermen who worked the same stretch of river for decades did not need electronics to find fish. They read the bend itself, and the bend told them everything. That skill is what this video is about. Before anything else, here is the single most useful concept in river reading, and you can apply it on the bank in the next 30 seconds without any equipment. A seam is the visible line on the water surface where fast current and slow current meet. You can see it as a line of foam, debris, or ripple change, one side moving quickly, the other moving slowly or barely at all. Fish do not hold in the fast water because holding there costs too much energy. They do not hold in completely still water because the food delivery system that moving water provides is absent. They hold precisely at the seam, where they can sit in the slower water and dart into the fast lane to intercept food as it drifts past. Find the seam on any bend and you have found the first address. River bends concentrate fish for three reasons that work simultaneously. First, the current on the outside of a bend is faster and cuts deeper, creating the scour holes and undercuts that provide both depth and cover. Second, the current on the inside of a bend slows and deposits sediment, creating shallow gravel bars and sand flats where baitfish and invertebrates concentrate. Third, the collision between these two very different water types creates the seam, the boundary zone that acts as a permanent food delivery line. These three features do not rotate or change randomly. They are fixed by the physics of moving water and are present at every bend on every river. Once you understand which feature is where, you can step up to a new bend you have never fished and know within 2 minutes where the fish will be holding. Every bend has three distinct zones, each holding different things. The outside bank is where the current hits hardest. The water here is deepest, the bottom is scoured clean, and the bank itself may be undercut several feet below the waterline. This is where the largest fish in the bend spend most of their time. Catfish, large bass, and big panfish all prefer the security of depth and the overhead cover an undercut bank provides. The inside bank is the opposite, shallow, sandy, gently sloping, often with exposed gravel bars at lower water levels. This is where smaller fish and baitfish concentrate, especially in early morning when the shallows warm fastest. The seam running between these two zones is the transition zone, the conveyor belt for everything drifting downstream: insects, crawfish, small baitfish, any organic material the river is carrying. The fish at the seam are the actively feeding fish. Reading current speed from the bank is a skill that requires no equipment and takes about 60 seconds to develop at any new bend. Watch the surface and identify three things. First, look for the fastest water. This is usually marked by standing waves, choppy ripple, or the heaviest surface disturbance. Second, look for the slowest water, flat, glassy, or barely moving surface, typically against one bank or behind any obstruction. Third, look for the foam line or debris line between them. This is your seam. Once you have identified these three features, you know the hydraulic map of the bend without stepping into the water or using any instrument. The foam line is the most reliable indicator because foam and surface debris accumulate exactly where current speed differentials meet, which is exactly where fish hold. Here is the rule that most river fishermen learn backwards. The outside of a bend looks like the wrong place. The current is fast, the water is deep, the bank is steep and hard to fish from. The inside looks like the right place, calm, shallow, accessible, comfortable to stand on. But the largest fish are almost always on the outside. The inside produces smaller fish and baitfish. This counterintuitive arrangement is fixed by hydraulics. Once you know it, you stop wasting your best presentations on the inside bar and start directing them where the fish that actually justify the trip are holding. The outside bank of a bend often conceals its most productive feature below the waterline, the undercut. As current strikes the outside bank repeatedly over years, it erodes the soil and clay at the waterline and below it, leaving a horizontal shelf or cavity that extends under the bank anywhere from 1 to several feet. From above, the bank looks like a simple, steep wall at the water's edge. Below the surface, there may be a horizontal cave running parallel to the bank, providing perfect overhead cover for fish that want depth, security, and a direct view of the seam above them. Old rivermen tested for undercuts by running a long stick along the base of the outside bank. If the stick could be pushed horizontally under the bank more than a foot, they knew the undercut was there and worth fishing. Catfish and large bass use these cavities as daytime holding areas, becoming more active along the seam at low light. Different species in a river bend occupy predictable zones that shift only moderately across the season. Catfish hold in the deepest water of the outside bank, often directly beneath the undercut or in the scour hole at the base of the bend. They move onto the seam in darkness or very low light. Bass hold along the seam itself and along any structural transition where gravel meets soft bottom, where the undercut ends and the bank becomes vertical, where a submerged log or boulder creates a current break within the seam. Panfish, crappie, and smaller perch typically work the inside edge of the seam and the transition zone between the seam and the inside flat, feeding actively on insects and small invertebrates drifting through. Each species has its address, and the address changes by only a few feet in either direction depending on the time of day and the season. The character of a bend changes significantly with water level, and understanding this change separates anglers who find fish in high and low water from those who only produce at normal flows. When the river is running high after heavy rain, the current pushes everything off the main seam and into the eddies, backwaters, and flooded bank edges where the water is calmer. Fish move out of the fast main channel and hold wherever the current is broken, behind flooded trees, against cut banks just above normal water level, in the slack water of newly formed backwaters. When the river is running very low, the opposite happens. The seam tightens and fish concentrate into the deepest remaining water, which is typically the center of the outside scour hole. The bend that holds fish in many places at normal flow concentrates them all into one small zone at very low water. Time of day shifts the active zone within a bend in a pattern consistent enough to rely on. In the early morning, the inside flat and the upper portion of the seam are most active. The shallows warm first, and bait fish move into them, drawing feeding fish up from the deeper outside water. As the morning progresses and light increases, fish that were working the shallows drop back to the seam and the lower half of the water column. By midday in summer, the most active fish in a bend are typically holding in the deepest part of the outside bank and feeding only occasionally. Late afternoon reverses the morning pattern, with fish moving progressively shallower as light drops and temperature in the shallows begins to fall. Old rivermen timed their sessions to match these movements, rather than simply arriving at any hour and hoping. When an old riverman arrived at a bend he had never fished, he did not immediately cast. He stood back from the water and spent 2 to 3 minutes reading before he ever touched his tackle. He identified the fastest water first, then the slowest, then the foam line between them. He looked at the outside bank for signs of undercutting, vertical soil faces at the waterline, exposed root systems, a bank that overhangs the water rather than sloping into it. He looked at the inside for gravel bars, shallow color changes, and any natural debris accumulation that would indicate a slack pocket. Only then did he decide where to place his first presentation. And that first presentation went to the seam, not the middle of the pool, not the fastest water, not the inside flat. The seam first, every time. Within every bend there is typically at least one slack water pocket, a small zone of nearly still water created by some obstruction or curvature that deflects the current just enough to create a calm refuge. This might be behind a large, submerged rock, inside a slight secondary curve in the bank, or in the transition zone where the seam current energy finally dissipates against the inside flat. These pockets are disproportionately productive because they represent the best of both worlds. Minimal energy expenditure to hold position, immediate access to the drifting food of the seam, and some protection from overhead exposure. Old bank fishermen memorized the location of slack pockets on their home bends and checked them first after cold fronts, during midday heat, or when water was running high, because fish moved into these calm zones when conditions on the main seam became difficult. After significant rain, a bend changes faster than most anglers account for, and the window it opens is worth knowing. The first effect is a rise in water level that pushes the seam laterally. The foam line moves, and zones that were productive yesterday may now be under the main current. The second effect is a pulse of washed-in insects, worms, and terrestrials drifting along the newly expanded seam. A rising water bite that draws fish from the scour hole up onto the seam to intercept it. Old rivermen watched for it by monitoring the foam line. When it moved and fresh terrestrial material appeared on it, they knew the window was opening. Building the mental map of a bend takes 2 or 3 visits under different conditions. And once built, it stays accurate for years because the hydraulics do not change unless the physical channel does. The field checklist for reading any river bend. On arrival, stand back and read for 2 minutes before you cast. Identify fastest water, slowest water, and the foam line between them. Locate the outside bank. Look for undercutting signs at the waterline. Locate the inside bar and its slope. Find any slack water pockets between the seam and the inside flat. First cast, to the seam, every time. Species by zone. Catfish in the deepest outside water. Bass along the seam and structural transitions. Panfish on the inside seam edge. Water level. High. Fish the eddies, flooded edges, and new backwaters. Low. Fish the outside scour hole only. Time of day. Morning toward the inside flat and upper seam. Midday toward the deep outside, evening back toward the shallows. After rain, watch for the foam line to shift and fresh terrestrial material to appear on it, that is, the rising water bite. The bend has been running this same system since before anyone fished it. Read it correctly, and it will tell you exactly what you need to know. Subscribe to Traditional Angling for more field-based fishing knowledge.